It's of course a great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, DigitALL, Bridging the Gender Digital Divide, that my office is organizing together with ODIHR on the occasion of this year's International Women's Day. We chose today focus on the digital divide because access to information, and thus also to technology and freedom of expression, are key for women's empowerment to exercise their rights and to fully and equally participate in private, public, and political life. The gender digital divide entrenches existing societal inequalities and injustice, while gender inequality itself is one of the root causes for the persisting digital divide. If we are to move towards more just and inclusive societies, as we all committed to do, we have to bridge the gap. At RFoM and the OSCE more broadly, we are convinced that any freedom can only be inclusive. This principle builds the basis for comprehensive security, sustainable development, and lasting peace. Gender equality is at the core of a true and inclusive enjoyment of human rights. But unfortunately, we continue to see several gender-specific challenges for freedom of expression, which include the digital divide as obstacle for women's access to information, as gateway for other human rights and well-functioning democracies. This also includes gender-blind or biased technologies that perpetuated discrimination in the digital realm. A gender-responsive design, development, and deployment of technologies, on the other hand, advances women's empowerment and equality. To achieve gender justice and freedom of expression, we need to address the structural barriers, inequalities, and discrimination women face. Last year, together with the other free speech mandate holders of the multilateral system, I launched a joint declaration on gender justice and freedom of expression, which provides guidance for states, social media platforms, the media, and the general public on eliminating discrimination and prejudice, averting gender-specific restrictions, and addressing gender-based violence, including in the digital context. The joint declaration also highlights the need to bridge the gender digital divide, increasingly urgent in an information space dominated by digital technologies. This becomes even more important against the backdrop of the overall backsliding of human rights and civic space that we have witnessed in the last years. Crisis situations, be they connected to the coronavirus, climate, or conflict, or the war that we are living now in Europe, exacerbate many existing challenges to free speech, media freedom, as well as gender equality. We should strengthen our efforts to leverage digital technologies and innovation for gender equality across the OSCE region. This is the intention of today's event. We want to understand better the various aspects of the gender digital divide, as it includes not only physical access to technologies, but also to skill sets and questions of accessibility of used interfaces and language. We need to ensure gender-inclusive tools and applications, but also address technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Today, I hope we will be able to better grasp the full scope of the gender digital divide as a first step, and importantly, to explore holistic and effective responses. We hope to identify what states can and should do to live up to their positive obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights for all. I want to thank ODIHR for the great cooperation on this event and look forward to the discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Representative, and the gratitude mutually goes back to RFoM for the terrific cooperation in preparing the side event. Welcome to all participants, and thank you for spending your lunchtime or early afternoon or late morning with us on this side event ahead of tomorrow's International Women's Day. Our two organizations thought that we will dedicate some time to discussing the gender digital divide. As of course all of you know, we are even connected through a digital technology. It is these technologies, including the internet, that dominate so much in our daily lives. And these technologies are a medium to exercise our human rights today. So if you imagine the right to freedom of expression, or also freedom of religion or belief, and many other rights, we do this using digital technologies. And they're also a prerequisite to fully participate in public and political life. You think about a peaceful assembly or protest nowadays, it's unthinkable to organize this without promoting it through social media, for example. In principle, digital technologies such as the internet seem to be a magical tool accessible to everyone, but as we will discuss today, this is not exactly true. And I have a wonderful panel to hear more about this, the different aspects of the digital divide, which, as the representative very astutely already said, is more than just whether you have access to a smartphone or a computer. Let me just, for housekeeping, say that the meeting will be recorded. This is to make it available also to interested audiences who may not be able to be with us at this very moment. And also, let me invite you to post any questions that you have for the panel in the chat. Now, it is my privilege to introduce to you our speakers of today. I don't know whether Ina has been able to join in the meantime. Yes, she has. Hello. So let me start with you, Ina. Ina Bavcic is a cybersecurity and civil society coordinator at the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, or DICA. And amongst many other assignments, she leads research on cybersecurity in relation to gender and human rights in the Western Balkans. Then we have Ms. Barbara Okeyo, who is the communications lead at the Digital Freedom Fund. She is committed to strengthening civil society in the areas of social justice and advocacy, the intersection of gender and digital rights, sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. And finally, Anastasia Sirmont, a campaigner for Eastern Europe and Central Asia at Access Now. She's working on the digital rights issues in restrictive environments, but she also serves as at the board for Inclusion Europe, and is dedicated to exploring solutions and technologies to promote inclusive education. So I hope that for you, dear participants, there will be interesting new information with this high-powered female panel of experts. Let me maybe start at the basis. We talk about gender digital divide. We maybe think we know what it is, but do we really know what it is? Barbara, if I turn to you first, what is the digital divide? What do we mean when we use that term?
Thank you, Andrea. It's good to be here. And hello to everybody. So I think Teresa did give us a very good introduction into what the gender digital divide is. And usually on a very simple level, it's about the inequalities in the way that women are able to access the internet and access tech. But if we're looking at it in a granular level, which I believe is why we're gathered here today, how do we access the information that is available on the internet? Is it equitable for both men and women? And the skill sets, how are we able to develop the skill sets between men and women? Are they the same, right? And then also in terms of the communication styles between the different genders, right? If I could start by talking about the skill sets, women have faced obstacles from the beginning in the early phases up to their career level, right? So when they're looking for during the early education level, they're facing obstacles towards joining the ICT. During seeking employment, there's obstacles that are unique to women. During employment and during career advancing. There's issues that are unique to women, for example, overcoming stereotypes, cultural barriers, absence due to feminine issues. We're talking about pregnancy, maternity issues, and motherhood. These are issues that are unique to women and also influence them in terms of developing the skill sets. How are we able to bridge this gap between men and women to enable women access these digital skills? In terms of access to information online, we know that it is access to information is a great way to free speech, and women are often sidelined. We've had situations where women's websites where they are giving crucial information about reproductive health, crucial to women, are being shut down. Why are we shutting them down? Why are we blocking this access for women? In terms of that, we also have some online apps that use data that have been collected by men, and they give inaccurate information to women. We're not centering women in the needs of those apps. We could go on, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will continue more on this. And then I also wanted to touch on the communication around the gender digital divide. How is it shaped? How women and men consume the information is different. And this is according to research, right? So because for women, we prefer more a rapport style, more personal stories. But for men, it's more about facts and figures and report style. But are we factoring this in the way that we structure our communication? So I'm going to leave it there, Andrea. I hope that I've given a good summary of the gender digital divide.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It's always good to start at the beginning with an explanation of what it is that we're talking about. And you have alluded to some aspects of the digital divide and reminded us that it's not just having a smartphone, having a computer, but also the skill set to fully use these technologies and different styles in communication, access to information, etc. And the access to information is a good segue to ask Anastasia for an intervention. Anastasia is working amongst many other things on internet shutdowns, and maybe it's also less known that internet shutdowns are also something that affects men and women in different ways. Maybe you can explain that to us, Anastasia.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Andrea. It's a great pleasure to be here. Indeed, governments that impose deliberate internet shutdowns are choosing to further widen gender gaps and other digital divides, deepening existing inequality and even hobbles women's economic development in some way. We have already talked about access to information. Indeed, quite obviously, internet shutdowns deny women access to primary source of essential information on their reproductive and sexual health. In many countries, many topics like breastfeeding, childcare, pregnancy, abortion are still a taboo. So information posted online is the only available source for women to know about these topics. The internet can also be a primary source of financial income for especially socially and economically disadvantaged women. Internet shutdowns rob women of their economic rights, career opportunities, and interfere with our efforts to empower young women and girls to take up more non-traditional roles within their families. Social media platforms like Instagram, Telegram are extremely popular venue for women to sell their handmade crafts, other goods and services, especially in small towns, villages, rural areas. And internet shutdowns like the one in Iran, India, or Uganda actually resulted in women losing their businesses. Even more targeted social media blockages, like the blockages imposed by Russia amidst Russia and Ukraine war, preventing women from conducting their businesses and resulted in not in losing the whole income, then in losing a substantial part of income and their clientele due to the digital illiteracy of the population about the circumvention tools. Women are robbed of educational opportunities by the internet shutdowns as well. the internet shutdown imposed in Iraq and Gabao region in Tajikistan, for example, for half a year, of course, resulted in students being unable to continue their studies, and forced many students, including, of course, female, to actually travel around 600 kilometers to another cities in order to submit applications to the universities online. Some consequences of internet shutdowns are even more drastic to women and can cause starvation. In instances of internet shutdown in Kazakhstan last year, for example, or Pakistan in Uzbekistan, we saw that families with children went hungry because they were unable to withdraw cash or from debit cards and credit cards, and online payments and bank transfers were impossible during internet shutdown. You need to understand the context here. In these countries, usually women are left with children alone when their husband travel abroad to work and send them money. So amidst the shutdowns, it was impossible to do so. Women were left with no sources to live. This is all on internet shutdowns, and of course they affect all, but in many ways women are affected in more negative ways. Back to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Anastasia. Very interesting to hear so many more aspects, so many more aspects of the impact of this digital divide, including on the livelihoods of women, and considering that these technologies are also a tool of business and income and education. So thanks a lot for that. If I may pass another question to you, because I think it fits here quite well in our way to list some of the aspects of the digital divide. We have also, of course, heard initially that also gender-based violence takes place offline and online, and it also leads to women disengaging from this way of communication through digital tools. So if I may just ask you to tell us a little bit more about that before I get to Ina about the kind of security tools that would help women bridge this challenge. Anastasia?
Yeah, sure, Andrea. Yeah, you're right. Online harassment and online threats faced by women are another examples of digital divides that exist today. Unfortunately, the political, societal, and gender power asymmetries often grant authorities opportunities to weaponize the information they extract through smear campaigns, blackmail, extortion, and doxing, often targeted at women. This can include threats to publish private conversations or photos, videos of women, or share them with media. And for women target, especially in the absence of robust, gender-sensitive legal, social, and psychological protection mechanism, it can result in a life-changing experience and a very damaging experience. They will face social and professional isolation, and they will be forced to leave platforms on their own initiatives. One example included, for instance, North Caucasus, self-organized group of women who grant free help and protection for victims of domestic violence via social media platforms like Instagram. And after they've been harassed online and after coordinated bot attacks, they were actually forced to shut down the project because they were shadow banned firstly by the platform, and then they completely lost the trust and safety of their platform by the victims. Another examples of actually persecution of women bloggers include example from Tajikistan, where right now female bloggers are harassed and intimidated through social medias by law enforcement authorities. They are forced to publish videos with apologies for their online activities, including like examples of wearing Western clothes swearing, dancing, or other so-called inappropriate behavior. Of course, such pressure, such instances of shame, forcing women to decide to leave the platforms and to completely stop their online activities, further deepening the divide and gap, because like man bloggers face no such consequences for their activities.
Thank you, Anastasia. Very sad and very true. Maybe just also to add the aspect, of course, that there are many risks for women and also children to be groomed for trafficking on the internet, and that is probably also something where digital technologies could take this more into account and provide some safety measures. Talking about safety measures, cybersecurity is the segue to address Ena, who is an expert on this issue. Ena, what is the interrelation between cybersecurity and the digital divide?
Thank you, Andrea, and apologies for the connection issues. I'm actually now at the ODIHR headquarters in Warsaw. Thank you for this also very good introduction. I think what Barbara and Anastasia mentioned are very important segments also of cybersecurity. So internet shutdowns and hate speech online are definitely disproportionately affecting women in cyberspaces. And this is one of the reasons why many women, especially women who are performing public roles, are discouraged from using online platforms for amplifying their voices, because their voices are being continuously shut down. Another aspect of cybersecurity that we are looking into through DCAFs, now we're conducting a research on cybersecurity in the Western Balkans through our research network, is actually cyber violence, and how cyber violence is tackled by different states, what are the mechanisms on how to address cyber violence. And when I'm talking about cyber violence, I mean gender-based online violence. It is definitely evident, even from the first glimpse into this topic, that women and girls are definitely the biggest victims of online violence, and that unfortunately, in many instances, even when the existing system to address gender-based violence responds to these instances, the online component is somehow neglected. I will give an example of cases where violence as such has been prosecuted as gender-based violence. Dissemination of illicit or non-consensual images, and videos has been prosecuted, but the aspect of continuous pressure against the victims has continued. And this shows the inability of states to actually address the online component of gender-based violence. So I would say that all of these instances really act as a great discouragement for women, especially women who feel like they are more prone or more in the public eye to actually participate in these public debates, and thus discourages them to use the benefits of online tools. But this also doesn't affect only women who are in the public eye, doesn't affect only politicians, journalists, and women human rights defenders. It affects every woman. It can affect every woman, and what we see, and I see personally, is that especially when it comes to little girls, there is a different perception on how girls can use internet. And what I've seen is that from even when they're little, girls have more control on how they use internet. they're more, how to say, there are more precautionary measures because parents or their guardians are more afraid of these instances of abuses and violence. So only this fact discourages many girls and many women to freely enjoy internet as men would do. I would stop there, and maybe we can continue through other questions.
Thank you so much, Ina. Maybe if I may play the devil's advocate and just ask, wouldn't the response maybe be that women should just have a bit of a thicker skin to, when they get hate mail or hate messages on social media? Can you maybe paint a bit of a clearer picture of why this is not just ignoring some maybe hateful or spiteful messages, but it really has a very dramatic impact on women and genuinely discourages them from using these platforms altogether?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good point. I think the main issue is that hate speech is continuous, that online space provides violators or perpetrators somehow a continuum of violations against a person. There is also the fact that we are still not in a place where we can respect the right to be forgotten. So not all social media, not all aspects in the internet have been enabling people to be forgotten. I will maybe give. I will try to explain through again portraying a case. So, for example. You are a young woman who is exploring your sexuality, and you record your photographs or videos of yourself. And then somebody, because you don't have maybe all the protection that is in place, somebody hacks into your phone or communication, takes these images that are of private character and that you have, of course, every right to make, takes these images and starts sharing them online. It doesn't have to be broad sharing. It can be just sharing to a couple of friends. And then at some point, one of the friends that got your picture gets into a fight with you. And this friend uses this picture to shame you to a bigger group of friends, and then this bigger group of friends shares it to the bigger group of friends, and at some point, all the persons that you know, so it doesn't even have to go widely, all the persons that you know have these images, your private images, and they use them to mock you, to ridicule you, and to discredit your persona. Even when you go to the police and the court issues a sentence against the person who is illicitly sharing these images, and even if this person goes to jail or its videos or like camera and computer gets confiscated, these images, one, are still out there. Second, if this person is still mad at you for these reasons, they can still continue online hate speech against you. So there is basically very little. The only way for a victim of such violence to actually escape from this is to completely erase herself from the internet. And this means that she will not be able to use internet the way she wants to use it. So I think that this is, of course, this doesn't happen to everybody, but just the fact that it can happen to anybody discourages a lot of especially young women, but also more mature women to really enjoy and to use benefits of social media and internet the way they would like to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna. It of course takes different forms and different levels of unpleasantries, but we should just clarify that many of these messages that women get are not only hate speech, but are threats of violence, including sexual violence, and of course that is extremely disturbing and leads then to the disengagement altogether. I'd like to wave in here a question that came from our audience, linking also or asking you also about to what extent this affects also women at the workplace, in which way maybe there are specific aspects of online harassment of women at the workplace that we should also maybe mention as a challenge for women. Is there any of the panelists who could say something briefly about that? Ina, and I think Anastasia, was this a little nod, or let's hear from Ina and then see.
I will just give an example of there was a case of a French media where women were continuously receiving harassment from their male colleagues, which was quite brutal, and it has pushed several of them to even resign their positions. And there were reports of this, but they were never taken seriously. And once the harassment was directed to more high positioned journalists, and one of the male colleagues also got this harassment, the harassment was tackled and written about, and the perpetrator said, well, it was a joke. But of course, as we know, the harassment in a workplace is never a joke, and it should be tackled. This case shows that unfortunately this is seen as a joke as long as it's directed to women, especially to women who are not in a managing positions. And just the fact that, we still have discrimination in most of the sectors where women are not performing managing roles, especially, there are research talking about specifically media where there are a lot of female journalists, but there are not so many female journalists in the managing positions, show that yes, women are much more vulnerable in the workplace. This is an example of that went to public because it was related to the media, but it happens a lot everywhere, and it should be involved in the human resources tackling the mobbing and violence in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ina. Maybe at this point, let me turn back to Barbara as well, because what we also, of course, want to discuss now that we have gotten a bit of an overview of the very sad challenges for women in the digital sphere, and also the aspects of the digital divide. Let's turn to see what can we do against it. Maybe Barbara, you can give us a start on how technologies and communication tools could address the digital divide, or what would need to happen to address some of the issues that we have just heard about.
Thank you, Andrea, for the floor. Yes, indeed, there are negative effects, but I think there's also ways that we can use tech positively to be able to protect women online. One of the recommendations, I may say, is connect female-owned organizations and activists with funding or investors. So, for example, at the Digital Freedom Fund, we are proud to support not just the digital rights organizations, but human rights organizations and women rights organizations. So we have to make this connection for the women and the activists on the grassroots level, because there are women who are doing this, organizations who are doing this on a daily basis, and not just on International Women's Day. How are we lending our support to them? There is also encouraging the use of technology to combat gender discrimination, which I believe Anna has spoken about, making sure that women are safe in online spaces, both online and offline spaces, designing content to highlight female success stories online and in tech. And this is very important for young girls. I would also touch a little bit, I'm not a legal expert, but we could also explore issuing laws to protect women in unsafe situations online to combat online harassment. And in terms of protecting the access of information, how do we protect women from accessing the information online in regard to their reproductive and sexual health? How do we make sure that the women in vulnerable situations, in situations of gender-based violence, who are in restrictive environments, are able to access this information? So that's what I would recommend, Andrea.
Thank you, Barbara. In the meantime, let me just also convey to our audience that we've heard from a very well-known human rights defender in Central Asia, Tolekan Ismailova. Thanks for tuning in, Tolekan. Who has basically reiterated the challenges of internet shutdowns for human rights defenders in Central Asia. So that links to the point that Anastasia has made earlier. Anastasia, do you have any advice on how we could address the digital divide of women and girls in your area of expertise?
Thank you, Andrea. Well, first of all, states need to denounce state-sponsored internet shutdowns and other forms of unlawful interference with the freedom of expression, information, and in general, internet connection. We need to particularly underline the negative consequences for women and girls of internet shutdowns, and preserve internet as a space for democratic participation of women. My colleagues mentioned the cases of online harassments via social media platforms. So states need to be engaged in obliging online platforms to exercising human rights due diligence and human rights impact assessment, especially in cases of gender-based violence on their platforms. We need to make more explicit references to digital security risks of women, and we need to distribute and make available for women digital security resources, education, and training, including on circumvention tools in order to preserve their democratic participation online. I and my colleagues talked about the instances of targeted surveillance of women, including activists and journalists, as a form of gender violence. And we need to recognize surveillance as a form of gender violence, and perhaps incorporated this issue in the policies, including perhaps the ban of selling surveillance technologies targeted at women.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. The security measures make me turn to Aina one more time, because I think you're very knowledgeable about the design of security measures. And from what we have heard, security tools and apps and technologies would also need to take into account the specific vulnerability of women and girls to the threats that we have heard about. What would be your advice in this regard?
Well, I would say more women need to design these apps, definitely, and as this is also one of the issues, as we mentioned before, gender gap in the business, in the sector, especially in the cybersecurity sector. I think yes, women should design them, and women should these apps, or the design of these apps, should be fed in with real victim cases, like real survivor cases, who can pinpoint to what are the best solutions. Because for now, the second aspect is, and I think is a very important aspect, that these applications should be free of charge and should be accessible to all. Because what we have now is that we do have certain applications that help in increasing security of women online, but they are not accessible to all. There are few who are, but they are designed more for children and their general security, so they're not really following what is specifically needed for women. So I think the main prerequisite should be that they are free of charge. I would also add that you know, as Anastasia and Barbara mentioned, that the state has a very, very strong role in all of this. First, by, you know, providing access to internet to all, but also by providing legal redress mechanisms that would effectively address online both gender-based online violence, but also other forms of pressures, threats, and even shaming, online shaming. So this should be really a priority for the states to include. Sometimes you don't need to make a specific law. So for example, the states can only include a non-illicit image or non-consensual, image and video sharing in the data protection laws. So we don't need to invent new solutions. We can just use the old solutions and improve them. So that would be it. Mainly, of course, there are more solutions, but
Thank you, Ina. It reminds me to share with the audience. My terrific support team has provided me with some figures and facts, and maybe this is a good time to reflect on the gap in the participation of women and girls in science, technology, engineering, and maths. And I've been provided with the figures from an OSCE report, which said that only 5% of girls wish to become ICT professionals at the age of 15. And so, of course, this is where it all starts, where the women and girls are encouraged and are given the sense that they would be suitable and would be knowledgeable enough to become ICT experts. But I think the whole branch is created in a way that discourages women from participating. Then, of course, if we're one of the few women who tries to survive in this sector, I can imagine that it's also not always a pleasant experience. So this is something definitely to take note of. What could be measures to increase the representation of women and girls in designing these technologies, which hopefully would also give a boost to gender-sensitive design. Talking of which, one issue that we have only mentioned briefly in the beginning, but not gone into more detail about, is the bias that is inbuilt in technologies. And maybe I can ask the panel to reflect a bit on that. How does it come that technologies are biased, gender biased, and are not inclusive in design? Who would like to have a go on that? Sorry, I have the chat box open, so I don't see who of my panelists raised their hand. Barbara, please go ahead.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the technological apps. And what I find interesting in some of the examples, for example, the Flow menstrual app that was using data that was collected by men, and hence misdiagnosing women who've got irregular period cycles. How are we getting this information in terms of during the development and the design phase? Who is involved? Are there women involved when collecting this data? So I think if we want to talk about how technological tools are designed and developed, we must put women at the forefront of that. If it's for women, let it be designed by women. Let's get the research from the women and then let the women play an active role. And I think it also ties into what we had started saying at the beginning in terms of the digital skills. And this is why it's very important to ensure that women have got the digital competencies from a very young age, right? From the time that they're trying to seek what employment avenues that they can go for. So I think that is interesting. I think we need to also question some of the technological tools that are being used for women. Also, not necessarily a tool, but a pathway. For example, when women are seeking counseling online, for example, when they're in restrictive environments, how are we making sure that this technology is available to them in ways that they can understand and in ways that are safe for them to be able to access the information?
Thanks a lot, Barbara. The question seemed to have disappeared, but I saw a question earlier in the chat of a participant who was interested more in the legal framework. How protection in the legal framework could be improved. There was a specific reference also to what extent such protection should be introduced at the constitutional level. But I hope our participant who had this question will allow me to broaden it a little bit and ask our panel, to what extent is the legal framework needs to be changed? And I see Anastasia wants to have a go at that. Go ahead.
Yes, I have one example from the region where we need more robust, as I told before, gender-sensitive legal protection of women. In many instances, women can't bring complaints for cases of online harassment or insults online before the law enforcement officers because they need to indicate who is behind the attack, and it's requirement by law. But unfortunately, in many cases of online harassment, we can't indicate who is behind the attack because of the anonymization and so-called bots behind it. So women are left completely powerless. And as we brought it up many times, the only solution for them is to deplatform. This is why we need to change such legal practices and recognize the right to bring complaints on the cases of online harassment, even if we don't know who's behind them. Of course, in order to prevent internet shutdowns, states should refrain from legislations that actually grant them the possibility to shut down the internet or to heavily censor online platforms and content online. I guess these are my 2 cents, and I give it back to Barbara and Ina.
Thank you. Ina, would you like to add to that on the legal framework?
I think I already mentioned regarding the legal framework. I would just mention that there is, I would just try to mention the social media content moderation and the issues that are happening around this, because many social media have certain guidelines on content moderation, and they use AI technologies for most of them to actually detect whether this is in violation to their with their guidelines, and this is a problem for countries, well, such as the ones that I'm coming from, where our languages are not so widely represented, and we do not have necessarily a person who understands the language, who can adequately respond to these cases. And then another thing is that, well, how these guidelines, even when there are these,
I'm not sure whether it's just me, but Ina, you're breaking up, unfortunately. Talking about technological challenges.
The international human rights. I think that
And I'm afraid you broke up. I think it worked
Yes.
again. So maybe if you could just repeat your last sentence.
I just wanted to emphasize that these private companies that are running social media should also adhere to international human rights standards and international human rights case law.
Thank you for flagging this. Of course, yeah, the issue of content moderation is a really important one, which gives me a chance to refer to the very important work of our colleagues at the RFoM in this regard, and to some of the resources that have been posted in the chat function if you want to check out some resources. Let me pass one final question to all three panelists to add on the aspect of solutions and recommendations. Can you give us some examples of policies and initiatives that have worked, that have been designed to bridge successfully the digital divide for women and girls? Who wants to have a first shot at this question? Recommendations for states. We have covered some already before, but maybe for a wrap up, let's try to get a bit of a bullet point list. What would you like us at ODIHR and our colleagues at RFoM convey to states? What is on their to-do list?
Okay,
Maybe Anastasia, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I can repeat once again several recommendations that might be helpful to address the digital gap. Speaking of internet shutdowns, we of course encourage states to denounce them and to refrain from imposing internet shutdowns or enacting any legislation that actually enable them to do that. We need, as we talked before, robust content moderation and governance. Therefore, we ask states to oblige online platforms to conduct human rights due diligence and human rights impact assessment. As Ina rightly noticed, platforms need to engage in content moderation in different languages, and they need to be more transparent about how and in what ways they invest in content moderation in many languages as to gender-based violence-related cases. We need digital security resources, education and trainings for women, including uncircumvention tools, and we need more robust legislation actually to address those issues. At this point, I just want to also mention the resource of digital security, digital helpline that Access Now runs, and which is available to women activists, journalists, and human rights defenders to mitigate risks and threats that they face online. And of course, we need to recognize, as I told before, targeted surveillance of women as a gender-based form of violence, and we need to actually incorporate this issue and to address this issue in order to stop it.
Thank you, Anastasia, for filling that bullet point list of recommendations to states. Barbara, do you want to go next? What is on your wish list?
Thank you, Andrea. So apart from the things that Anastasia and Anna have mentioned, which are also very important, I just wanted to reiterate connecting female-owned organizations and activists with funding for the work that they're doing on a daily basis. I believe this will go very far in reaching our goal of bridging the gender digital divide in the various areas and the various challenges that are being presented. So that's my wish list. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Barbara. Ena, do you have any bullet points, to-dos for states to add?
Yes, well, I would just add that states, when thinking about cybersecurity governance, should have focus also on a human dimension of cybersecurity governance, and they should actively try to tackle issues of gender and human rights violations when it comes to cybersecurity. We have given specific ways on how to do it. Of course, this is either by introducing specific laws that will tackle these issues, or by educating their public servants, judges and prosecutors on gender-specific and human dimension of cyber violence. And again, to say that in terms of private sector, there needs to be more equality and more participation of women in the sector. There should be more positive action towards educating women and giving them more chances to actually participate as technical experts in developing certain solutions, but also policy experts in developing solutions.
Thank you so much. I think that was helpful to kind of try to pull together some of the key issues and recommendations that we came across in our discussion today. I want to thank really big hand of thanks to our excellent panelists. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us, and thank you for all the work that you do every single day in your organizations. And I trust and hope that we will continue to work with you. So on this note, a big clap online. And it is my pleasure and honor now to introduce to you Katja Ryabiko, who is the first Deputy Director of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, who we can always trust to have something to say on women equality. Katja, thank you so much for making time for our event, and the floor is yours for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you to all of the participants. I was indeed taking notes and was listening to with the interest to the discussion. And I would like to start where Representative Teresa Ribeiro started us off, as digital technology offers a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. And I think that when I was listening through the discussions, what was the key for me is that I gladly appreciated that this was a solution-oriented discussion. And we started with really recognizing that gender equality in itself is an integral human right. And this is going throughout the discussion, as we know, those of us who participate in the discussions on gender equality with the audiences who are subscribed to the concept and the audiences that might not necessarily fully subscribe to the concept, we know that there are a lot of challenges. And this event illustrated that digital technologies have great potential to empower women and girls in the OSCE region and beyond OSCE region. And it all can be done with the goal for the full enjoyment of fundamental human rights, both offline and online. And of course, when we talk that this is a great opportunity, there are also a lot of challenges that were discussed today, and there are solutions, of course. But I'd like to bring us home for a second, as both ODIHR and RFoM are the institutions of the OSCE. And I would like to recall that OSCE participating states have recognized that the digital divide represents a particular challenge to human rights as a whole and to all democratic values. And they have committed to paying particular attention to women, youth, persons with disabilities in bridging the digital divide. And they also recognize that the free flow of access of information, including on the internet, are beneficial to the development overall. And I think that these are the commitments that need to be monitored in terms of the implementation, and they've been, I think, in one way or the other discussed during the meeting today. What is also interesting is that the acceleration of the digitalization in our lives is coupled with the emergence of new technologies, has far-reaching implications on the societies as a whole, on human rights, on democratic developments, on the rule of law. And this is especially true for women and girls. not only at the OSCE region, but beyond the OSCE region. And here, ODIHR would like to stress once again that gender equality is an integral human right in itself. And it requires positive response by states to respect, to protect, to fulfill, and it applies to both offline space and online space. And I really do appreciate it. I'm thankful to the panelists to trying to bring that positive perspective, because it was indeed a solution-oriented discussion. What is also interesting, what I find interesting, is that more equal digital landscape plays an important role not only in upholding the right to freedom of expression that I think that Madam Representative was talking about, but it also upholding is equally important for upholding other human rights, including the right to access of information. And access to information constitutes an important gateway, if you wish, the right, the gateway that can empower women and girls throughout OSCE to fully exercise their fundamental human rights, such as freedom of peaceful assembly, such as freedom of religion or belief, and many others. And here I'd like to stress two more points with relation to combating the gender digital divide. One is ensuring equal access to information is extremely important. And here, girls and women should play a critical role. And as we say now, they must have a seat at not only the seat at the table, but be part of the decision-making processes, being able to contribute to the solutions that we've discussed today. But also, combating the digital divide is an important role, has an important role in empowering women themselves and girls on the internet safety, to prevent all of the negative trends that we are seeing across the OSCE region, helping them avoid ICT-enabled gender-based violence that many speakers, actually a few speakers brought up today, like hate speech experiences, breaches of privacy, human trafficking that I think Andrea mentioned in particular, grooming, and also hijacking of accounts. So it has combating gender digital divide has many different dimensions, and I think that this discussion contributed to finding a little bit making a step in the right direction of trying to find what are these dimensions exactly in that fight. Finally, I'd like to stop on the impact, because that was also mentioned by many panelists, that digital technologies need to be developed in a way that they already understand the impact on human rights, and particularly including the impact on women and girls. And the gender responsive design of information technologies is of incredible importance, and it's critical to ensure that OSCE participating states continue with implementing their commitments on upholding and implementing their human dimension commitments. With that, I can continue because Andrea put it out. This is the topic that is very close to my heart. But I'd like to stop here, and I would like to sincerely thank everyone for the contribution of this discussion. And I really do hope that next year we will come back with more solutions, bringing more solutions to the table together, ensuring that these challenges are properly addressed by various stakeholders, by participating states, by civil society, and by us as international organizations representative who are greatly committed to this topic. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and all the best to everyone.
Thank you so much, Katja, for this wrapping up of our webinar. Thank you to everyone for spending your lunch hour with us. We nourished maybe not your bellies, but hopefully your brains and your hearts with the information about how to bridge the digital divide of women and girls in our new technological age. I want to spread thanks around again to the panel, to Caitlin and Julia for doing the brunt of organizing this event, to our two high-level representatives, the Special Representative on Freedom of the Media and the First Deputy Director of ODIHR. I think their presence shows that this is really high on the agenda of both organizations. And I want to thank the interpreters who again have done a wonderful job. It's always a pleasure working with you. And last but not at all least, thank you to all participants for listening in. I hope you found it interesting, and we will find you again in some other digital or in-person space. And tomorrow, have a very good International Women's Day. Goodbye, everyone.